Welcome, everybody, to the Education Showroom's podcast today, where we're talking about one of the most requested topics of the last 2 to 3 months. So for context, everybody, May, June time, we put some polls out on social media. We were asking school and MAT leaders, what podcast would you like us to organise? What can we do to help you in terms of hints, tips, techniques, what's going on within schools and MATs, areas that you think are the biggest problems that you require help and support with, or insight and guidance as to why things are happening, what support is out there. Well, guess what? This was the number one. This was the most requested podcast area. So we're delighted to bring you the best in the business today, which is Aspire BM, and we're delighted to welcome Danny to the Education Showroom's podcast. Danny, great to see you and welcome.
Hi, Matt. Thanks very much. Yeah, very much looking forward to discussion, which I know, obviously, working in our schools ourselves and supporting schools as we do, I know is an extremely hot topic and very much at the forefront of need in schools. Yeah, so very much looking forward to the podcast.
As am I. Thank you very much indeed. And the topic of today is as follows, everybody. Challenging behaviour is on the rise. We explore with Danny what schools and MATs can do to support children presenting challenging behaviour. So again, challenging behaviour is on the rise. We're seeing it, we're hearing it. School and MAT leaders are asking for help and support. How do they deal with these problematic situations? Why is it happening so often? It's also a massive area in terms of why certain educators are leaving the profession. So it's not just about on a daily basis what's happening, in corridors, classrooms, playgrounds. It's at the core. It's a core problem, which is, causing real issues across the sector. So this is about challenging behavior. We know it's on the rise. We're hearing it. We're seeing it. We're feeling the pain of it. We all are. And Danny is going to guide us through hints, tips, techniques, how Aspire BM later in the podcast can support you, your colleagues, your school, your MAT. But Danny, we're going to start today with a little bit of a getting to know you. Then once we've learned a little bit about you, we'll talk about why do you think now is kind of optically problematic behavior is in the news, it's in the headlines, we're more cognizant of it, we're more aware of it. We're going to start by learning about Danny. So Danny, tell us a little bit about you, yourself, your background, your history.
Yeah. Hi everyone. Nice to meet you all. But I've been running Aspire Behaviour Management now for 10 years, and we provide outreach support and some training aspects as well, which I'll go on to a little bit further on in the podcast for you all. My background previously kind of started working actually in youth offending institutions and more outreach youth offending processes, youth offending teams, and kind of from that I was there for around about 10 years. And then very much from that, I felt that there was a need to almost try and support an early intervention process, really, an early identification of children and young people, that were in need of support, and families, which I'll go on to in a little bit in a podcast as well. Following that, my time within the youth justice system and working within the youth justice system, then began working within schools. And I was a manager of a behaviour service within the local authority for, again, around about 6 years. And then came away from local authority and set up Aspire, really to provide a real holistic and bespoke need to schools, really. So been a journey for myself in terms of, supporting children who are on the cusp of offending behaviour to actually really wanting to get that support in at a much earlier age, and identification much earlier age for the children, for the young people, and for the families, really, working with, so that hopefully the long-term successes for those children and young people were the outcomes were better.
It's amazing. Huge amounts of experience, which is great. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to invite you here and to share your wisdom with us. And I know 20 minutes is not enough, but it's a good start. It's a good starting point. Thanks, Danny. It's lovely to kind of learn a little bit about your history, background, and I think more importantly, your expertise. So let's go into the first, scenario. Problematic behaviour is on the rise. Everyone's talking about it. And from the Education Showroom's perspective, I don't think in the last 3 years we've ever known a period where we've had so many MAT and school leaders contact us over the phone, via email. We've got a problem. We're having more problems. We're struggling to deal with them. We're struggling to know how to deal with them. We're seeing difficulties that we've never seen before.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to talk a little bit about now. In your experience, in your area of expertise, Danny, why do you think this is on the rise? What is happening or what has happened?
Yeah. I think first thing I want to say is, and I think it's really important that everyone listening actually, and I know many MAP leaders and school leaders will know this and understand it, but I think it's really important to start with a case of that, to understand that all behaviour is a form of communication. So children and young people are trying to communicate something to us, and that behaviour comes from a place of the emotions that are driving those behaviors. And I think that's really important to start with that as an aspect because, in terms of where the challenges have come from, why behavior is on the rise, really, there's so many facets and so many aspects to that. We're talking about many different aspects of one of the biggest ones that we're seeing consistently and regularly in schools is trauma and children that have experienced any form of trauma, and that may be things such as domestic violence within families. It may be family bereavement. It may be, family separation, right through to obviously the huger aspects and issues around, neglect and abuse. And I think when children have experienced those traumatic situations and those traumatic issues, they don't know how to deal with those emotional factors that come along with those, really. And because of that, that's when we see behaviours escalate, because children and young people don't understand how they're able to deal and regulate themselves due to those traumatic experiences. So I think, that's certainly one aspect that we are seeing consistently across schools, and that kind of, I suppose, stems from, again, other factors that are linked to that, such as, maybe if children and young people from disadvantaged communities and disadvantaged families where maybe there are financial difficulties, so, poverty is very much coming into that then, where, where then we're talking about basic needs, and basic needs not being met for children potentially and young people. So, there's that impact of that on children. And then because of the experiences that these children are having on a day-to-day basis within their own families with caregivers, that then gives a very different view on the world for those children and young people, if that makes sense. And, they aren't then able potentially to regulate, because those regulation models of how we want children and young people and, well, us as adults to regulate as well, they're not being shown those or taught those potentially, within some family environments where there are challenges and difficulties and traumatic difficulties, like I've just kind of spoke about, really. And kind of linked to that, obviously, is stuff around parental mental health, where, the challenges that parents will be having around potentially mental health issues of their own, where they're potentially not then able to meet the needs of their child fully. I'm not saying they don't at all, but it's about meeting the physical and emotional needs of of children, their own children within their care. So that can bring real challenges, really, around that, including poor family relationships. Unfortunately, with that, then children deem the interactions that potentially go on within, families where they might be experiencing difficulties or some chaotic circumstances, the interactions that children and their experiences within those then bring those interactions
Yeah.
into schools, either with their peers or with the adults within school as well, really. So that can be a huge issue. And linked to that is, things such as school, and Matt's may have heard of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, which really encompasses a lot of what I've just spoke about, really. But when some children experience a number of adverse childhood experiences, it has a significant impact on the way they see their world outside, and also on brain development, and it's understanding the experiences those children and young people have had, and the way that actually their brains have then been developed, potentially overstimulated due to some of the trauma factors that we've just discussed, really.
Yeah.
So what we're finding a lot in schools, and I'm sure many, school and MAT leaders are finding as well, that lots of individual children that may have been through traumatic events are very hypervigilant, and it only takes a small little thing to actually trigger things off and
Yeah.
escalate that process for that pupil, because all of a sudden the survival instinct kicks in and what we call the fight, flight, or freeze response kicks in, really. And that's a very challenging and difficult situation for staff in schools to try and deal with. But there is ways and effective ways of dealing with those situations as well. You've also got, other aspects as well, neurodevelopmental needs, so children, that, for example, may be on the autistic spectrum, and the specific, sensory needs that they may have, and children potentially that might have ADHD as well. But I think where schools we are certainly finding much, very consistently across schools we support and speak to regularly, that schools, I believe, are getting much better at early identification of those
Yes.
pupils and getting that support in as early as possible. But there are obviously clear needs that take place then, really. And I think really one of the, I suppose, lastly, really, I think from a, why I think, challenging behaviour is on the rise. I think COVID has had a huge impact on that. The loss of course, academic ability and work in schools to support pupils through that has, we felt that in many facets within schools, obviously from an academic point of view. But I think from a social emotional point of view, we're seeing children now coming into reception. We're 5 years on from COVID.
Yes.
We're seeing children now coming into reception without those interaction skills, and
Interesting.
those skills that we all need to get on with other people.
Yes.
And do those very basic nurturing skills such as sharing, etc. So we're seeing a lot of the impacts of COVID really now, I suppose, coming into schools over this last couple of years, and the difficulties with that. And I think because of the interactions and maybe lack of potentially, and as I was talking about earlier, some of the social context within some families, that's then had a big impact on speech and communication difficulties in children as well. So it's certainly not a one size fits all in terms of why behaviour is on the rise, but I think there's a number of factors, as I've just spoken about, I suppose, really to summarise, that really have had the impact of why we're seeing this rise, really. And I suppose our challenges, educators and supporters within schools, is how we support pupils and children through that, really.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. What are things, I mean, when I was at school, and of course there was problematic, challenging behaviour then,
Yeah.
Of course there were, it's always been there. But when I was at school, social media didn't exist.
Correct.
Thanks. You clearly know my age.
Not about your age, Matt, but you're absolutely right.
Didn't exist. The other spin-off of social media, of course, is so-called influencers, and another spin-off of social media, which, whether it's influencers or sporting icons or other figures, is of course role models, is where I'm going with it. What's your thoughts on that in regards to the rise in challenging problematic behavior? Your social media content, your influencers around socials and so on. I'm not going to name any names, but certain footballers recently,
Yeah.
refusing to play for their club. What kind of a message does that send out to young people? What's your thoughts around those areas, Danny, please?
I think, like you say, Matt, is social media is now a huge aspect that not only schools and educators have to deal with, but obviously parents have to deal with and manage, as part of that. And I think, as you said, there's more and more young people now wanting to almost to become, have a career in, doing influencing,
Yeah.
by YouTube or whatever it may be. And I think it has a huge impact on things. But the difficulty as well is the content that's out there, and the content that is available at the click of a button, and the influence that then that has on children, young people, But I believe we live in a world and a society where children, young people are looking for instant gratification all the time.
Yeah.
And that influence from social media, and as you say, influences from that side of things has a huge impact. Certainly within secondary schools, high school education, you can see the challenges and the difficulties that's come, but we're also seeing that coming through, in primary schools now as well. And technology in general has a huge impact. Going back to what I talked about earlier in terms of communication and interaction. You know, we're talking about social interaction here, which is what all human beings
Yeah.
are meant to do, and what we kind of thrive off, and what we all have a inherent need to have. But with technology now, children and young people essentially are on the screens. We're talking potentially up to 15 hours a day or whatever it may be.
So it's very, no, it's very interesting, very interesting. And yeah, I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. I mean,
Yeah, I think it has a huge impact, not just the social media side, but from a technology point of view, because, and also when children are on screens, that they're lacking that social interaction, and that social interaction is being taken away,
yeah.
Which then has an impact on their social interaction with their peers and adults when they become, go into their education setting. So a huge, huge, huge factor in it. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Danny. That's really interesting. Thank you very much. And I think that's very much the why and
Mm.
the theory and your experience is what you're seeing. Let's flip it around. So for the school leaders here, the classroom practitioners, the multi-academy trust leaders that are really in need of help, guidance, who to turn to, what can they do, techniques, what a starting point.
Yeah.
Over to you for that. So what is out there? What can school and MAT leaders do to try and help manage this rise in problematic behaviour, Danny, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the first thing I think that we always say from our point of view that the foundation of everything we do is about connection and relationships, and it's about staff in schools ensuring that connection and that relationship is built with those children that need that and that really benefit from that. Obviously, all children need to have that. But I think it's really important to understand that for some children and young people, that need gets met on a consistent basis through their caregivers within their families. For some children, that need isn't met. If you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, of those basic needs of, food, shelter, to those second level of needs of feeling safe, and feeling connected and feeling a sense of belonging. What I hugely and passionately believe about schools is we have a enormous potential to help children and young people understand the power of that connection and relationship, and actually what a difference that can make. And actually we, as educators and staff within schools, can provide that to them that they may not be getting elsewhere, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
So for me, connection and relationships are key. So building up relationships, building up connection, no matter how small, and as often as possible. It may be maybe a 2-second high five that you're giving to that pupil that actually could be a huge, huge factor for them. If you do that regularly and consistently, you are always what we always say, you are putting pennies in that bank. It's about making sure that connection and that relationship is really built. I think providing predictability is hugely important as well. So sometimes, again, going back to what I was saying about, children that may have experienced trauma, etc. Predictability is really key, because when predictability isn't there, the world can be quite a scary place. And with that brings anxieties, worries, and those then, as we just spoke about earlier on in the podcast, those emotions that they're feeling, they will then lead to challenging and escalated behaviours.
Yes.
So actually, if we can ground and understand that through delivering predictability and consistency of support to pupils, it can have a huge impact, huge impact. And as I talked about, really, lots of emotional warmth, lots of connection through that is really key in terms of, providing that support to pupils, and lots of positive interactions as part of that really as well. Schools making your environments really welcoming. That's really important as well. Children and young people have to feel safe and secure before they can move forward in their learning. So we talk about connection, we talk about having that basic level of need and feeling safe and secure. And Maslow's hierarchy of needs shows that, in terms of we need to feel that before we can move forward and before we can progress with our academic ability, etc. So providing that real, safe and welcoming environments, along with the interactions from staff is really, really important. So I think it's about schools thinking about, is our school welcoming? Is my classroom welcoming?
Yeah.
Is it a place where children want to be? Is it a place where I want to be as a practitioner working within my classroom? You've got to feel that to feel for the children and you people to feel kind of safe and secure moving forwards. I think as well as that is providing flexibility of approach and flexibility of provision for pupils as well. We can't do a one size fits all because as I was talking about in terms of children's needs and meeting children's needs, we may need to meet children's needs in a more basic way, as I've just spoke about, for some specific individual pupils that we know struggle with the environment, struggle with the interactions, and we know may regularly, escalate, because of one reason or another. So being able and having an understanding of how important it is to adapt that provision, to maybe the standard timetable for the rest of the pupils within the classroom, having individual workstations, whatever it may be that actually provides that pupil that feeling of, I'm okay, I'm actually settled. Because if we get them there and they're feeling safe and secure and settled, or what we call in the window of tolerance, then actually we can work with that window of tolerance. We can support those pupils in that point. If they go above that window of tolerance, what we call hyper, or below that hypo, that's when we're struggling then to get them to conform to what we need them to do and what we want them to do to enable them to progress forward, really.
Yes, yes.
So I think that's really important as well as part of that. As I've said, identifying pupils as early as possible with difficulties and needs, whether that be, as I've talked about, factors that are the difficulties, or more neurodiverse side, identifying pupils and children early with those needs and enabling those supports are going in place as often as possible, really. A huge one is for us as well is working with parents.
Yes.
We can do as much as we can within schools to ensure we're providing what I've just been speaking about. But children, at the end of every day, go home, to their parents and to their caregivers, sorry. So it's really important that we work with parents, schools work with parents really closely to ensure that they're on board with the plan and that they understand the importance of why we're putting these supports in place for these children and young people, really. Because that, for us, that provides that sustainable change for that pupil and enables them to feel settled and safe if they are getting that from all environments and all parts of their life, really. And really just being really emotionally available to pupils is really important. I'm going to kind of go back to what I said right at the beginning, I suppose, that all behaviour is a form of communication. If we just focus on the behaviour, we're not actually dealing with the behaviour, because we're focusing on what the pupil or what the child or young person is doing, rather than what is the underlying aspect that is making the child behave in this way. Does that make sense? So, we always say all behaviour is driven by those emotions. If we can support that emotion, if we can be emotionally available for that child or young person, then we have more of an opportunity to be able to support them more successfully and re-engage them back into the learning really as soon as possible. And I think that's really, really key to it.
Danny, I've got a question for you just there. You mentioned about the parents. And this is something I've been thinking about throughout this podcast as you're sharing. In your experience, how important is it for a parent, a guardian, carer to actually be proactive and come to the school, a school leader, the head teacher, the DSL, whoever it may be, and say, we've observed these behaviours at home or wherever that child lives. I'd like to give you a heads up. This is what we're seeing. Does that happen a lot, or is that minimal? What does that place look like?
Yeah, I think it depends on. We do see it. We see it regularly, and in a lot of the schools that we're in as part of our outreach work, we're working with lots and lots of parents within those schools. But we do see, in our discussions with Senkos and heads and deputies, where they're coming saying we've had a parent come to us to say they're really concerned maybe about certain behaviours or certain things that are happening. That can lead on to then, the conversation with the parents about, okay, what what does that be? What are you experiencing at present? Are there any factors that have triggered these behaviours to all of a sudden come into play, really? Um, and that's where things you can dig much deeper into things and understand factors that are influencing some of those difficulties. So we do see that in schools where parents are coming to us, we absolutely do. But you also have you also have something with parents that feel for one reason or another, whether with their own challenges or whatever it may be, might not feel they have the confidence to come to school to ask for that support. So I
Yeah,
think it's also about schools being proactive in, saying, come into school, we're here to support you. And I
yeah,
know many, many schools and Mats are very, very, very good at that and provide that communication and ongoing support really
yeah,
to parents. And we do that as part of our work. We will support schools in putting on parent drop-in sessions where they can just drop in, have a conversation and a chat, a discussion around any difficulties that they're having, and that might just be the thing that breaks the ice.
yeah,
Um, but I go back to what I said, I suppose, but 5 minutes ago. So it comes down to relationships. We're not just talking about children, young people who you have to build a relationship with those parents as well for them to feel comfortable to come and say, I'm having a real difficulty here, and I
yeah,
really don't know what to do. And I'd really like some support with that, really. So I
yeah,
think from our point of view, yes, Matt, we see it both ways.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Parents coming into school, but also schools being really proactive
That's really
in
good. Yeah.
that parental engagement as well, as point of view. So
And I know you mentioned earlier, Danny, as well about how important it is for the children, the students to feel safe and secure and to create that environment,
mm,
both a physical, let's use the word conducive, a really good conducive environment, but also
absolutely,
a conducive, let's call it person environment, the staff, everybody in the school. But I guess just interlinking with my question about the parents, I guess that environment also extends to the parents, but so they
of
feel
course it does.
comfortable, they feel confident, they feel
Absolutely,
safe in sharing information that's not going to be, spread and shared unnecessarily to the persons that they don't want. So that safety, that feeling of I can talk, I know action can be taken, and I know there will be empathy and
absolutely.
understanding. What's the thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, you're 100% right, Matt. You know that the parents have got to feel that need and that confidence to be able to come into schools and have that, and that's then about the skill set of staff to be able to provide that approach to parents, where parents feel, as you say, Matt,
Yeah,
that they are comfortable coming into school to discuss some of those challenges that they're having. So yeah, it really comes down to that empathy, as you've talked about with parents, and giving them that understanding, being non-judgmental, but we all have our difficulties in life, every person, every family, etc. It may be different in different families and different people's situations, but having someone that you have the confidence and
yeah,
feel comfortable to go to is a really important aspect to be able to then go to be the start of potentially coming up with a solution to the difficulties, and challenges that are taking place really. And I think kind of sport there really, I suppose, about much more generalized things that schools can do on a
yeah,
whole school, I suppose, basis, if that makes sense. You've then got obviously very specific intervention work you can do with those individual pupils because it's about supporting them to build up their own
mm,
regulation toolkit as we call it, to enable them to use those regulation tools when they're maybe feeling in those more escalated and triggered situations. But key to that, actually, before they can actually do that,
mm,
we as adults and educators and staff supporting those children and pupils in schools, we have to co-regulate with them. We have to show them what that regulation looks like. Because if they can see it and feel it, they're then able to go, okay, that's worked for me in the past. And I know I got support and I know I can regularly go back to that person because I've felt that connection, I've felt that support, I felt them help me co-regulate in that situation. I can use that skill on my own now moving forwards. So those individual interventions to then enhance that further are really important as well to try and embed it further, I suppose, for those children and young people. And that can be done through your pastoral staff, organisations such as ourselves providing those support really to schools as part of those kind of more specific
yeah,
targeted intervention. all the other things I talked about, your baseline and are so important, being that I'm emotionally available adult, really.
Yeah, and that's great. I think, if we use the language of framework, considering all of those recommendations, hints, tips, what you see, what you do, what you hear, if we use the language framework, that could be for the listeners of this podcast today. If you're looking at what an infrastructure looks like, a framework, then Danny shared some wonderful items and content there for your consideration and to discuss with your colleagues. Danny, with this being a very, very important topic, the most highly requested topic, what I would like you to do, if you don't mind, and we don't normally do this on podcasts, but would you just mind taking a couple of moments to explain to the school and MAT leaders how Aspire BM can help them with this? The framework is great, and thank you, but these very specific situations, or should they have one, or should it happen in the future, upskilling themselves to be more confident in dealing with these situations. Could you just cover what you do and how you do it? Should it be of interest to anyone listening to this podcast, please, Danny?
Yeah, of course, Matt. That's fine. So we have a number of different kind of arms to our service and organisation. We have quite a large training arm to our organisation, provide lots of really bespoke training to kind of everything we've just been discussing, really, Matt. From trauma-informed practice to, supporting de-escalation, we have a safe schools training program, which looks at de-escalation, which is a really key side of it. But then also any physical support that might be needed with pupils, so at those real crisis situations. Training such as ACEs, etc., as I've spoke about. So yeah, we have that training arm, and people can kind of have a look at that in more detail. I'll give you kind of our link to
that'd be
our
useful. Thank
website
you.
in a sec. We also have an outreach service within our organisation as well. And so we provide outreach support to schools that commission ourselves individual schools or MATs that commission ourselves individually to provide real bespoke support to those schools and multi-academy trusts, depending on need, because we know not one school is the same. The needs and priorities in all schools are very different. So our outreach service delivers based on your need as a school, and we are going to those schools from our outreach service on a weekly basis. At the same time, with the same person, again, when I'm talking about predictability, consistency, we want, that's what our outreach service really provides, that bespoke support to schools that's tailored every half term, basically, to the school's needs. We also have an education psychology service as well. We know there are challenges within many local authorities around education psychology resources, and that is then stopping children in schools to go through the process for statutory assessment. So to gain, education healthcare plans. So we have a small education psychology service, and again, people can get in touch with us about that. And we also have a small behaviour specialist supply staff service as well. That is more focused on daily individual support for an individual pupil that may be struggling to engage in their class on a daily basis. So a member of staff from our specialist supply service will be there on a one-to-one with that child every day, supporting them and hopefully re-engaging them back into their learning. So there are kind of main four arms of the organisation really as well. Yeah.
An extremely comprehensive, let's call it, behaviour wraparound service.
Yeah, that's certainly what we want to, that's our aim and what we strive and to offer and are extremely passionate about, as part of that. Also,
absolutely,
that wraparound, consistent, and holistic support really.
Yeah, Danny, would you mind sharing with the audience, please, your contact details? I'm sure there'll be lots of people thinking, I need to have a chat with Danny, or I'd love some information. It may be that the school and MAT leaders listening today might have a very, very difficult situation and they want to pick up the phone and say,
yeah, of course.
You know what, can I have some advice? Can I have some thoughts? What's your contact details, please?
So yeah, our contact details, you can get in touch with those via our website. And also our website is www.aspirebm for behaviour management .co.uk. You can email myself at d.maher, and that's MAHER at aspirebm.co.uk. Or you can also email our inquiries line as well, and that's just enquiries at aspirebm.co.uk.
Super. Thank you very much, Danny. Listeners and viewers, thank you very, very much for taking the time to listen to this podcast, whether you're listening on Spotify or YouTube. We're incredibly grateful. Please let us know what other topics you would like us to focus on, and we'll deliver those podcast topics for you. Danny, I can't thank you enough for being our guest today. Your sharings, your experience, the framework model that we've spoken about, how you can help schools and MAT leaders, classroom practitioners, has been absolutely incredible. The part we started about with, which was why it's happening, was incredibly interesting. So thank you for your sharings. And I'd like to wish you a fabulous weekend. Danny, thank you very much indeed.
And you, thanks very much, Matt. Thanks for your time. It's been great doing the podcast. Thank you.
Thanks, Danny.